Hello everybody, my name is Happy and I'd like to welcome you back to my History Reacting channel. Today we'll be continuing our atomic era nuclear accident theme with what was the first nuclear meltdown. This is by a channel called Father Goose, and as always I will include a link to the original comment in the description down below. I highly encourage folks to head over there and show some appreciation if you like this video. Now, what are we talking about here? Okay. The first nuclear meltdown, this is the Chalk River incident in Ontario, Canada. This predates all the famous ones that we think of nowadays, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, and of course Chernobyl. This was a fairly minor one compared to those other three, but it's the first. This is where we first get a taste of what could go wrong and whether or not we could fix it. In this case, we do. A fairly famous individual is involved in this. And that's why I actually chose this video, because I was looking something specifically relating to this individual and this event. Most of the videos I found were either shorts, 1 minute or less, or much, much longer. This one is a perfect size for this week's theme, because I'm running it alongside The Great Northern War by Kings and Generals, and kind of a bonus film. So let's talk about the Chalk River incident.
When you hear the words nuclear meltdown, you probably think of the famous incidents at Fukushima, Chernobyl, or 3 Mile Island.
Right.
But not many people know that the world's first nuclear meltdown occurred in 1952 at Chalk River Labs in Canada. But what's even more surprising is that future US President Jimmy Carter was involved in the cleanup operation for this meltdown. So, how did this accident occur, and why was a future American president helping to clean up a Canadian reactor? Well, our story begins just before World War II, when the Allies were in a race against Germany to develop the first nuclear bomb. By 1937, France, the UK, and the US were anticipating conflict with the Axis powers and began research to develop the atomic bomb in anticipation of the war. Scientists in Paris identified that heavy water could work as a moderator to sustain a nuclear reaction.
Yep.
At the time, the only source
was Norway. I'm pretty sure it was Norway.
Heavy water in the world was a 180 kilogram stockpile in Norway, which was produced by a fertilizer company. To continue the research into atomic weapons, the heavy water had to be transported to France while evading Germany, who also realized the importance of heavy water and wanted the Norwegian stockpile for their own nuclear weapons program. In 1940, a secret mission was conducted to bring the heavy water to France. The French sent a decoy plane to Norway to purchase the water, which was intercepted by the Germans. All the while, the real mission was conducted undercover, and the water made it safely back to France. When France began to fall to the German invasion later that same year, the heavy water was sent to Cambridge in England in order to keep it out of Germany's hands. But England's research capabilities were limited by the conditions of the war, and a partnership with the US was the only viable route to continue nuclear development. Canada became a mediator between the UK and the US. Canada was well positioned to be a mediator for a couple of reasons. First, uranium could be mined at the Great Bear Lake in Canada's Northwest Territories. Second, Canada had significant expertise in nuclear physics, thanks in part to Ernest Rutherford's research on radioactive materials at McGill University in the early 20th century, which had helped create a strong nuclear physics program at the university. By 1942, the heavy water and researchers from Cambridge arrived in Montreal, and they began planning a National Research Experimental, or NRX, reactor to be located in Chalk River, Ontario.
Okay.
Ultimately, it was determined that the heavy water method would not yield nuclear weapons before the end of the war, and the US found ways to bypass the need for heavy water. Chalk River Labs was then reassigned to developing the peaceful use of nuclear technology to generate electricity, and the NRX reactor was built for that purpose.
At the time, this was the largest, I'm pretty sure this was the largest nuclear research facility in the world, which, if you think about it, kind of makes sense, because this is at the very, very foundation of nuclear research.
Brings us to the NRX incident, which would be the first nuclear meltdown in the world. In 1952, during preparations for low-power experiments, one of NRX's operators was in the basement at the Chalk River facilities and accidentally raised some of the reactor's control rods.
Okay. Doesn't look like he can go into detail on this, so let me add a little bit to this. So the control rods are there to help keep temperatures under control. The radiation doesn't go through them, so it helps insulate, keep flow under control. Why they're called control rods. What initially happened, these are primarily done through pneumatics. In other words, air pressure will push the control rods down or up. There are electromagnets involved that help keep them in place for an emergency measure, but often they're just lowered by gravity. So there's a lot of failsafe involved in this. You've got gravity feed to help get them down. You've got electromagnet to help keep them down. You've got a pneumatic system to raise and lower them manually. So there's a lot of things to help keep these things down. Occasionally, though, you do need to raise some of them to change them out or to increase the flow if you need to do that. There's a lot of reasons why you'll want to be doing this kind of stuff. I don't know the specifics of what they're doing here, but I do know that there was an error made by one of the guys down in the basement. He raised a couple of control rods he wasn't supposed to due to concerns about valves, and I don't really know the specifics on that. The only thing I know for sure is that he raised a couple that he wasn't supposed to. Now, there were 4 buttons that controlled this system, and they were labeled, I believe, 1 through 4, and each one had a specific job. Well, let's let him continue, and I'll see if I can interject with what happens next. I think he's going a little fast on this.
The supervisor upstairs noticed this and immediately called the operator to tell them to stop what they were doing. The supervisor then went downstairs to fix the problem.
Yeah, there was an alarm going off, so that's what made them aware that something had been done incorrectly.
Leaving his assistant at the desk upstairs. The supervisor fixed the operator's mistake, but due to a mechanical defect, the control rods did not properly drop back down into the reactor. Unfortunately, though, while the rods did not fully drop down, they did drop down just enough for the warning lights to turn off.
Okay, that's not exactly correct. One of the rods did go all the way through. 3 of them did not. So minor quibble, but yeah. One of them gets all the way through. There's 3 rods that do not go all the way down, but they do go down enough to set off the alarm system that's telling them there's a problem. And of course, that's a problem.
Additionally, some of the cooling arrangements at the time were adequate only for the low-power experiments and not for higher-power operations. The combination of operator error, mechanical defect, and inadequate cooling resulted in some of the natural uranium metal melting and rupturing the aluminum sheathing and tubes which separated the heavy water, air, and cooling systems.
Okay, we're missing a major part of this. Let me go a little further, but he's missing a huge part of the problem.
As a result, 20,000 curies of fission products from long-irradiated uranium were carried by a flood of 1 million gallons of cooling water into the basement. Fused masses of highly irradiated uranium and uranium oxide were left inside the calandria, and the core vessel of the reactor and tubes of the calandria were severely damaged. Thankfully, no one was killed as a direct result of the incident.
Okay, it doesn't look like he can address this, which is kind of a pity because he missed probably the most important part of this. I mentioned the 4 buttons. Well, the supervisor realizes that they need to take more steps to ensure that this is taken care of. So he calls up to his assistant, who's back upstairs, and he tells him to push buttons number 1 and 4. And I don't remember exactly what each button does. This is something that I read about quite a long time ago. I've read a couple of biographies and things about Carter. That's how I know about this at all. But anyway, I know he said, I'm pretty sure it was buttons 1 and 4. And so his assistant puts down the phone, he goes over and he gets ready to push buttons 1 and 4. Then the supervisor realizes he just made a mistake. It needs to be buttons 3 and 4, not 1 and 4. Button number 1 raises for of the control rods. That's definitely not what they want to happen right now because they're already down by 3. What he had meant to do with 3 and 4, one of which I think pushes all control rods fully down and make sure the electromagnet is keeping them there. That's what he had wanted to do. That's 3 and 4. Instead, he said 1 and 4, and 1 is the one that raises 4 of the rods. So that's what makes this go from bad to worse. So there's error compounded by error in this particular incident.
The Canadian government determined that outside assistance was needed with the cleanup operation and asked the U.S. government for help. At the time, Jimmy Carter was a trained nuclear engineer and lieutenant in the U.S. Navy,
in the country,
and he was asked to lead a team in the cleanup operation. The reactor had to be shut down, disassembled, and replaced, and the cleanup team also had to clean up the spilled radioactive material. The reactor was so radioactive that each team member could only be in the core for 90 seconds before being exposed to the maximum permissible levels of radiation.
So this is a little misleading. So Carter's leading a Navy team, and they're going to be responsible for breaking down the reactor and getting the damaged parts out. There's going to be a lot of other people involved in this, in the cleanup, both from the U.S. and from Canada. So let's not get the idea that it's just Carter and his little team. They're the ones that are in there to do the stuff that requires technical know-how. They've got to disassemble this and take out the damaged parts and get things back under control. And then these other guys are going to be in here cleaning up the bad water and all that.
Which in 1952 were 1,000 times higher than what we consider safe today. An exact replica of the reactor was built on a nearby tennis court where Carter and his men could practice their operation. Carter's team had to disassemble the reactor, and they were each tasked with removing as many bolts from the reactor as possible in their 90-second shift. When it came time for the actual operation, the men had to be lowered into the reactor core, which was underground, and they raced to remove their bolts. While the operation was underway, the same bolts were removed from the nearby replica to keep track of their progress. Afterwards, Carter's urine tested positive for radioactivity for 6 months, and he was told he would likely never be able to have children. He would go on to have 4.
Also not correct. He'd go on to have 1. The other 3 had already been born. So Amy Carter, the young girl that you see here, was the only one born after this period. I'm pretty sure. Maybe the youngest boy, but I think all 3 boys were born by this time already. And I've read some of Carter's personal accounts of this, and he talked about sometimes they couldn't even get a single bolt out in the 90 seconds. They'd have to make a few cranks on one, and the next guy'd have to go finish that one off and then start the next one. It's really kind of interesting stuff, because these guys are on a very tight time schedule. They've got 90 seconds to find the right piece, get in there, try to get that bolt off, get out, the next guy gets in. Really complicated operation. And it's just kind of amazing that they pulled this off, because that would have been really hard to do. I like that they built this duplicate so they could actually, not only, he mentioned they practiced on this duplicate to get an idea of, visually where they need to go, what they need to do, kind of, they could work out any potential kinks before they got in there, because time was very limited. Plus, like he says, they remove the bolts on the mock-up to match what's going on in the plant so that they have a good way of visually seeing what still needs to be done and where it is, that kind of thing. It's actually kind of brilliant how they set this up.
After the NRX incident, nuclear research at Chalk River continued, and another reactor, the NRU, was built in 1957. In 1958, the NRU reactor experienced a fuel rupture which caused a fire outbreak and massive contamination of the area. But the NRU was repaired and would continue to operate until 2018.
I forgot to mention, I don't think he really mentioned it clearly, but when this reactor broke down, the heavy water was drained and it ended up all over the basement floor. That was part of the cleanup that needed to be done.
The research at Chalk River yielded the CANDU heavy water reactor design, which is used in Canada and has been exported to many nations around the world, such as China and India. The Chalk River reactors have also provided as much as 40% of the world's supply of medical isotopes, used primarily in the diagnosis and treatment of cancer. In fact, when the NRU reactor was temporarily shut down in 2009, it caused a worldwide shortage of isotopes. Even though the NRU reactor has now ended its operations, that doesn't mean that nuclear research at Chalk River has ended. In fact, a new reactor is in development right now and is planned to be complete by 2026. The Ultra-Safe Nuclear Corporation has designed a micro-modular reactor which would produce 5 megawatts of electricity.
I said this in another video, but you can name things whatever you want. Doesn't mean it's true. Ultra-Safe Nuclear Company. I like that name.
And could be used to provide electricity to remote mines and communities, which currently rely on diesel generators. The company will build its first reactor at the Chalk River site. But if you want to learn more about this innovative new reactor design, then you'll have to watch this video next.
Alright, I guess that's it. So yeah, I thought that'd be an interesting little thing to throw in here, the time that Jimmy Carter helped deal with the first nuclear meltdown. And yeah, he talks about his urine being radioactive for a while afterwards in several interviews. It's interesting stuff, but this is right there in the ground floor of all this. This was the first major learning experience. Anyway, thank you for joining me. I hope you're enjoying this double feature week of the Great Northern War and things related to the atomic era or to nuclear weapons, nuclear accidents, that kind of thing. We'll continue with this tomorrow, and we will then be moving into the Cold War by Oversimplified. So thank you for joining me. Until next time, bye-bye.